Good evening. Thank you. Welcome to the 2025 José Esteban Muñoz Awards. My name is Matt Brim. I am the Executive Director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies here at the CUNY Graduate Center. On behalf of our co-sponsor Public Programs here at the Grad Center, it is my honor and I get to thank you for joining us to celebrate the activist work of this year's Muñoz Award recipient, Angela Davis. Tonight, Professor Davis will be in conversation with Debarati Biswas, and James Harris will introduce them in a minute. But first, I want to welcome you all with a message from CLAGS that you belong here. I offer this welcome especially to our transgender and non-binary friends, our international and immigrant and refugee and undocumented friends. And our friends who have been targeted because they, like tonight's honoree, fight for racial justice and Palestinian liberation and feminist futures. And free speech for everyone. If this is your first CLAGS event, you get a special welcome. CLAGS is the first university-based LGBTQ Studies research center in the US. And at CLAGS, we believe in free, accessible LGBTQ studies for everyone. To paraphrase CUNY professor Audre Lorde, queer ideas are not a luxury. They do everyday good out in the world. Tonight is special, but it's special for more than one reason. Tonight I'm delighted to share the big news that CLAGS is getting ready to kick off our 40th anniversary celebration year. We were founded in Marty Duberman's living room in 1986, and I can't think of a better way to kick off our celebration year than with Professor Davis and with all of you tonight, so thanks for being here. It's also true that tonight is happening at a disorienting time, and a lot of people have asked me lately, will CLAGS survive the concerted efforts, the concerted attacks against LGBTQ studies in the university? We know that state funding for a long time has been withdrawn from public higher ed, and we also know that right now there are fascist threats attempting to erase transgender scholarship and Black queer studies and decolonial queer studies and international students. But the way CLAGS survives is your attendance at events like this, your activism, your word of mouth, and your financial support. And so I want everybody here to know that you can go to clags.org to learn about our organization, and you can also donate there. There's also a merchandise table and a donation station on the way out where you can get bags of books, including books signed by Kessler winner Sarah Schulman. Her new book, The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity, is in one of these bags. A wonderful book right now, and signed copies of Abolition, Feminism Now by, of course, Professor Davis and Gina Dent and Erica Miners and Beth Ritchie. Enough of that, but really thank you in advance for all the kinds of support you can give to CLAGS. It's now my honor to introduce James Harris. James is the outgoing co-chair of the Board of Trustees of CLAGS. James has done an incredible job over the past few years. James, we're going to miss you, and just give James a round of applause, please. Thank you so much for being here. Before I go, I should say that everybody received index cards when you came in the door. Those are for audience questions. We'll collect those about 7:10. Please write neatly so that we can see legibly your brilliance. And Debarati will be in conversation and include those questions in that conversation. Thanks so much for being here, everybody.
I mean, I think I have the easiest job of the night. I get to just introduce, first of all, my co-chair, Debarati Biswas, who is assistant professor of African American Studies at City College of Technology. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm so excited for you to hear the brilliance. And then I have the job where I have to introduce someone who needs no introduction. And so, you know, like, it's Angela Davis. I think I want to just end on like Cornel West described her as she remains, after more than 50 years of struggle, suffering, and service, the most recognizable face of the left in the U.S. empire.
Good evening. Professor Davis, I think everybody knows you, but I would say, if you need no introduction. But I wanted to begin by saying that tonight we at CLAGS are so thrilled and incredibly honored to hold space with you during Pride Month as we celebrate one of the world's leading philosophers and practitioners of freedom, the legendary scholar, activist, writer, and educator, Dr. Angela Y. Davis, and presenter with our prestigious José Muñoz Award. The José Muñoz Award was created to honor an LGBTQ community leader or activist for their advocacy and promotion of LGBTQ studies. And José Esteban Muñoz, as you all might know, was an influential scholar in the fields of queer studies, performance studies, and Latinx studies. This award thus serves as a way to amplify and celebrate queer and trans performers, activists, and visionaries who further what Muñoz dubs as, quote, the mode of desiring that allows us to see and feel beyond the quagmire of the present. Now more than ever, we need to practice hope and strategize liberation with Professor Angela Y. Davis, so we can collectively reach beyond the quagmire of this ruinous now. This might be the time of the monsters, but we know they are bound to lose. With Professor Davis, we want to focus our mind on the possibility of collective freedom and not just rights, in a system that was never meant for most of us to begin with. So before we get started, before the class starts with Professor Davis, I just wanted to remind you all to just write down your questions in that index card you received, and I promise to make time for your questions too. Professor Davis, what an amazing honor this is for me to have this opportunity to learn from you and be in your presence right now. This is such a dream come true moment for me, and I can barely keep my cool. So really, that is why I've written down everything. I hope you understand. But I was able to have this moment because of my CLAGS community, our executive director, and our amazing board of directors who said, yeah, you should do the interview, right? So here I am. But I also wanted to thank Professor Ruth Wilson Gilmore for connecting us with you, and also I must thank the chair of my department, Dr. Renata Ferdinand, for really telling me, you should do this, you got this. So here I am. Okay, so are we ready to begin the class?
First, I should tell everyone how honored I am to be here today and to be the recipient of the José Muñoz Award. But also, I should probably say that, the older I get, doing exactly the same thing that I've always done, I have problems recognizing myself in the way people are offering me these awards. I said, well, I'm not the person who's done all of this. I'm a part of a collective that has been engaging in struggle for decades and decades. So I feel a little embarrassed that when I, hear, all of the language about, what did you say, that I was the most recognizable?
You're iconic.
No, I always see myself as being on the other side, challenging the icons.
I know, that's why you are our icon, like the queer icon. Like, I don't know. When I was preparing for this class, I was reading, everybody who taught me what queer of color critique is, and everyone actually quoted you. So you see, here we are, and I'm here, my work, and suddenly coming to America makes so much sense today because of this moment. So, I want to say that you've been a relentless, compassionate, and a brilliant political organizer and activist for local and global struggles for liberation for more than 6 decades now. And Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall said when introducing you at Emory that you have lent your radical Black feminist voice to a variety of urgent social issues, and that your roots in Birmingham, Alabama, helped to explain some of your political commitments. And in your autobiography, and I just love the subtitle, With My Mind on Freedom, that's our subtitle. And so I was wondering if you can tell us more about how your family, your mother's work, or your childhood in Birmingham, Alabama, inspired your lifelong activism, political commitments, your class consciousness, and solidarities.
Okay. We could talk about that for the rest of the session. And, by the way, I'm out of water now.
Oh, yes.
And it's always a major catastrophe when that happens, because I don't drink out of plastic bottles. I refuse to drink out of plastic bottles. And, people bring plastic bottles, and then they say, okay, well, we'll bring you a cup so that you can pour the water. That is not going to save the ocean. That is not going to save the earth. But let me say that I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a place like Birmingham, Alabama, which was at that time the most segregated city in the country. And as a matter of fact, people later compared it to Johannesburg. That is how I learned about apartheid in South Africa, through the analogies with Birmingham. My mother, who was a remarkable woman, I don't have time to tell you about her, but she had the good fortune of meeting a group of Black people from New York who had come to Birmingham in the late 30s, the early 40s, to do organizing against racism, who had come to organize workers, who had come to organize campaigns for better medical care and housing, and we all lived in the same project. And my mother ended up, as a consequence, joining an organization called the Southern Negro Youth Congress. And she had the opportunity to hear W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, address the conference of what we now call the first SNCC, Southern Negro Youth Congress, SNYC. So, you know, I was reflecting, because she told me what she was going to ask, at least the kind of general themes. And so, as I was reflecting on this, I realized that if I had not become an activist, a communist, or, you know, that would have been the remarkable, because, you know, I was surrounded, oh, great, thank you, lots of water. And as a matter of fact, my mother met my father in the context of a campaign that the Southern Negro Youth Congress was doing to recruit young black men to fight against fascism. But also it was a period of the double V, fight against fascism abroad and racism at home. And my mother was someone, my sister, you know, always reminds me of this, that she always told us, particularly whenever we got upset about, as kids, about not being able to go here or there, not being able to ride on, you know, the rides that were there for the white children, not being able to go to the library because the library was not available to black kids. And instead of just leaving us to complain about that, she would tell us that this is not the way the world is supposed to be. And this is not the way it will be. And that you will be a part of those who change this world. So I always think that I kind of grew up with a rudimentary idea of critical theory. You know, learning how to challenge that which existed and to imagine other ways of being. And just, you know, one other thing, my mother's best friend at that time was a woman by the name of Dorothy Burnham, whose husband, Louis Burnham, was a major figure in the Communist Party. And he got run out of Birmingham by Bull Connor, by the way. And, but she is still alive. And she is now she just had her 110th birthday. She's a super centenarian, so, you know, I always give thanks to Dorothy. You know, as kids in the South, we were not allowed to call any adults by their first names. And especially because, you know, black people were always called by their first names by white people. But the communists, we were able to call by their first names. And their kids were the only kids who called my parents by their first name.
So, Comrade Davis, you were truly raised in the institution of freedom dreaming, right? And, you know, in the words of the great poet Cameron Awkward-Rich and Robin D.G. Kelley, historian, this is what the institution of, you know, when you are raised in the institution of freedom dreaming, I guess it makes sense that in 1968 you became a member of the Communist Party. or of USA, and more specifically, the Che Lamamba Club of LA. So in a way, carrying on the long Black radical tradition and its association with the Communist Party. Like you just talked about Dorothy Burnham, W.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Lauren Hansberry, Claudia Jones, and like everyone, I guess, I learned from by reading, and even an early Bayard Rustin and Paul Robeson. And so despite the homophobia in the party, there seems to be a kind of very interesting, important, and crucially important connection between between the Black radical tradition and the Communist Party, particularly Black queer feminist tradition, right? So can you, talk about that? Like, what is this complex relationship like?
I was actually a member of the youth organization of the Communist Party when I was in high school. Not in Birmingham. I went to high school here. And I went to Little Red Schoolhouse, Elizabeth Irwin High School. So, I always like to point out that it was at Elizabeth Irwin at EI when I read the Communist Manifesto for the first time, when I was about 15, I think. Probably should have read it before, but and so it was kind of bizarre that I ended up joining the Communist Party later because, as a teenager and later, many of us thought the Communist Party was not radical enough. But that's another story. Black people were drawn, I think, not Black people in general, but people who wanted to make a change. And, sometimes what we imagine is so complex. We talk about intersectionality now and it took a long time for us to think about trying to examine more than one thing at a time. As if that would require some massive intellect. But this is how we experience the world. We don't experience the world in isolated analytical categories. We may develop those categories in the hopes that we may be able to understand more closely, but we should never forget that it's an analytical method. It's not the way the world exists. So I'm thinking about the fact that it was Black women in the Communist Party, women like Louise Patterson, who came up with the notion of triple oppression, and began to talk about race, class, and gender. I mean, they didn't use the word gender at that time, that concept, but this idea has been around since the 19th century, actually, that it really is impossible to understand our world, our social world, without putting these things together and sometimes pulling them apart in order to better understand them. But when we pull them apart, we can't forget that we have done the work of pulling them apart, that is not the way they exist. So I think that Claudia Jones, who was absolutely remarkable, it's because of historical context that concepts with respect to sexuality were not available at that time. But had they been, I'm certain that women like Louise Patterson and Claudia Jones would have made use of them. There's the book that Carol Boyce Davis wrote about Claudia Jones, which is called Left of Karl Marx. And many people take that really seriously, and it should be taken seriously. But actually, if you go to Highland Cemetery in London, you will see that Claudia Jones is buried immediately to the left of Karl Marx.
Yes. And, and that's why she was so good for this country that she had to go away, and so did W.B. Du Bois, right? So yeah,
Well, she was, we're talking about the ways in which people who are immigrants are treated today. She was forced to leave because she was not a citizen of this country. So, and many during the McCarthy period were actually forced to leave. That's one more example of the way that we're reliving some of the worst moments in the history of this country right now.
Yeah, I had a different question because, you are taking us to what is the most important thing, and that is, New York is your home, but it also became your prison. And I'm thinking of your time here when you were incarcerated in Women's House of Detention, the House of D, where many queer women and trans people were held and tortured until it was closed in 1971. And so I was wondering, did your experience fortify, your work as a prison abolitionist, when you were there?
Well, okay. At that time, I hadn't thought yet about prison. Had I thought about prison abolition? I'm trying to think. No, actually, that was a period during which I think many people were starting to question the role of the institution of the prison in a different way. My experience had been primarily working to free people who were in prison, working to free political prisoners. And that's why I ended up a political prisoner myself. I can remember during that period, I would say to people, you should support the Soledad brothers, Erica Huggins, and Erica Huggins actually went to jail just shortly before I did. There weren't that many women; there were mostly men, political prisoners. But I remember saying to people, you'll never know who will be next. And if you join us in this movement, you may very well be helping yourself. And I had no idea that I was actually also talking about myself, because after I went to jail, large numbers of people who had been attracted to the movement to free the members of the Black Panther Party who were in prison, including the women who had been incarcerated at the House of D before the Women's House of Detention in New York. I do think I learned a great deal. I also, as you say, it was there was a very vibrant culture, LGBTQ culture, which I did not really fully understand because it was the first time I was confronted with. I can remember this young woman saying to me after I was taken out of solitary confinement, because the first period they put me in a cell alone, And and there was this woman who used to bring my food, my meals every day, 3 times a day. And then later someone said, "Oh, I hear you met my grandfather." And I said, "Your grandfather? I don't think so." And then, as it turned out, the person who was her grandfather was a woman by the name of Harriet, who was actually so wonderful to me because she was one of the people trusted by the the jailers to take. She had free reign of the jail. She brought food to people, and she is the one who told me that a lot of the women were supporting me. Because I didn't know. I was told that the reason I was in solitary was because of the fact that there was the threat of violence. I didn't take that seriously, but she was the one who brought all of the information about what was going on the various floors. There were about 9 floors there. The vast majority of the women who were in jail there were Black and Puerto Rican. So when I found out what she meant by grandfather, I realized that there was this amazing, family-based culture that older women would adopt younger women. I ended up having two daughters. They adopted me. And so, you had certain kinds of responsibilities. You had to provide commissary for them if you had the money. And but then, as I wrote in my book, my autobiography, I realized that there was all of this energy that went into creating meeting places. If we want to be in a relationship, how are we going to see each other? Especially if we're not living on the floor. So it was about finding a meeting space like the chapel, church, or whatever. So it was very, a lot of energy was invested in it. So my response at first was that, why are you all spending all of this energy trying to figure out how to hook up with each other when we should be fighting the jailers? We should be organizing around that. And as a matter of fact, eventually, we did organize in that, what I considered at the time to be more overtly political way, because a bail fund was created. And so we organized the women who would actually be the recipients of the bail in such a way that they would continue to do the work to support the bail fund after they got out. So, my political desires were also satisfied. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know, I guess I got that from Birmingham.
You sure did. As you were talking, I was thinking about what Dr. Roderick Ferguson, who is a CLAGS recipient of our very prestigious Kessler Award, and he wrote in his field forming Aberrations in Black, and the quote is, "Queer of color analyses can be another step in the move beyond identity politics and toward what Angela Davis calls unlikely and unprecedented coalitions." And what you just talked about, the way you organized, this is unlikely and unprecedented coalitions. And I feel like this is very much part of your work with critical resistance. Can you And why was that important? Like, why centering this unlikely and unprecedented coalitions was important to your work with critical resistance? And is that a good movement building strategy going forward?
Well, first of all, Rod Ferguson is absolutely amazing. And I am I'm really honored that he received a José Muñoz Award, right?
The Kessler Award.
Oh, he was. Oh, sorry.
But they're both.
Well, we both got awards here, so. And his work is the perfect example of what it means to think all of these issues together. And I guess what he's referring to, see, the thing is that, you write something a long time ago, and I said, well, I had to think, and then I remembered that was something that I said in an interview with Lisa Lowe and for a book that she and David Lloyd were doing that's called, I think, Politics in the Shadow of Capital. Mm-hmm. Yes. And at the time, and Rod has always done these amazing critiques of simplistic identity politics, and I think what I was referring to at that time was the fact that we needed to develop coalitions, but coalitions, not in the way in which they were thought of at the time. Like, you get people together based on their identities, and the identities were very simplistically framed, and then you come together around what are considered to be their, what transcends the differences. Aftar Bra has a wonderful book in which she, writes about the fact that, we think that when we come together as different people, that what we have to do is come to a position that is the same. We have to transcend all of those things that are different in order to achieve what it is we all have in common. And so what she argues is that, maybe it's not what we all have in common that's so important. Maybe it's the differences. Maybe it's the differences that will give us the energy to do the work if we learn how to, as Audre Lorde pointed out, negotiate those differences and turn them into the motor, the fuel that will help us get where we want to go. So I was thinking then that, I think we were talking about prisoners, and I was arguing that prisoners and students, this was long before, I know it sounds really commonplace now, because so many students have gotten involved in amazing education programs at so many prisons across the country. But that was not happening then. And so, some of us were thinking about the fact that we needed to explore those possible relationships. And as a matter of fact, when I was teaching at San Francisco State and I began to teach for the first time in a carceral institution, it was the San Francisco County Jail, and I would take students from my class on incarcerated women at San Francisco State into the San Francisco County Jail and what's interesting is that they thought that they were going in to teach the women there. They just assumed that they were the ones who had the knowledge, and they would be, sharing it with those who were less fortunate. So the first thing I did was have them sit down with women in the jail and in small groups, and they had to learn from the women who were incarcerated, and it kind of blew their minds because they recognized then that knowledge isn't necessarily, the most important knowledge isn't necessarily what is generated in these institutions of higher learning, that there are other venues of, that was kind of like what I was trying to talk about then.
Yes, and your work has really changed the way we do critical thinking and critical writing. We think alongside a person who is talking from the experience of being incarcerated. We think alongside a person who is a freedom fighter, right? Instead of applying, a big theoretical piece to read somebody else, right? So I think your work really teaches us how to kind of think alongside rather than think with, rather than, write to somebody, right? So
My work and others. I mean, I'm never the one who is the innovator, so.
Well, I was rereading your essay that you wrote from the Marin County Jail, where you talk about prison, right? And that prison, and it's a great analysis of liberal capitalism and class analysis, I would say. And you said the prison has actually operated as an instrument of class domination, a means of prohibiting the have-nots from encroaching upon the haves. And, can you explain what you mean by that? You also said that we learn a great deal about the reach of the prison system, about the nature of the prison industrial complex, about the reach of abolition by examining the particular struggles of trans prisoners and especially trans women. And I was wondering if you can talk about this current political moment, which is rabidly anti-trans, anti-immigrant, immigrants of color, and of course, deeply colonial in so many ways. So, maybe if you can, help us make sense.
That's a lot. I'm just thinking. Did you ask people to write the questions? Because there's a sign that says "Remind audience to write questions."
Yes. So, Professor Davis, thank you. Would you please put your questions on the index card? We are 7 minutes late, so I'm not appropriating anybody's time. But if we started a little late, sorry.
Okay.
We got the question.
So that first quote that you read was written in 1970 or 71. And then the second part of your question comes from an insight, a collective insight that is more historically situated in the 1990s. So I really want us to be aware of historical context, because sometimes we think, oh, they should have known that back then, right? And it often requires a lot of work, a lot of organizing, a lot of intellectual work to reach the point where something is considered to be pretty much an idea that's available to everyone. So the question about trans insights that we acquire about the entire system by looking at the experiences of trans prisoners it's a serious one because for such a long time, people doing work around prison issues assume that if you're doing anything that's significant against the prison system, then you have to focus on black men because that's the population that is in the majority, or you have to focus on men. So you didn't even really think about the differences between the experiences of men, people who identify as men, and those who were marked as women. And I know I had been doing a lot of reading about prisons, and I had only really read about, before I went to jail, I had only really read about male prisoners. And so when I went to jail myself, I realized that this is not what I was told this experience was supposed to be like. And of course, if you look at women, there's so many more issues that emerge that, I mean, it's because we all know why that is. But specifically in relation to trans prisoners, we learned how to go beyond just, protesting that trans women are being incarcerated in male prisons. We learned how to challenge the gender-based organization of the institution itself, which allowed us to begin to think about the prison system as a gendering apparatus. And that's a very different insight. So, that was one of the points that I was trying to make. If we think deeply about these issues, we realize that those who are in the minority often in terms of the numbers offer the richest insights regarding the way the system works. And not only, we're talking about the gendering apparatus not only having an impact on trans prisoners, but on everybody. We think prisons there are male prisons and there are female prisons, and so that gender binary that the trans movement has been so helpful in contesting becomes affirmed and reaffirmed over and over again, and it affects the way people in the larger society think about gender. So this was a very important point, because those of us who were doing prison work were considered to be doing work on the margins of society, not really relevant to all the other issues, but we were just trying to help those who are unfortunately so deleteriously affected by this system. That's why people still say prison reformers. You say you're an abolitionist, and then they call you a reformer.
No. So, and I was wondering, how this moment, what you just said, that, thinking about trans women in prison is a way to understand. The best way to put it is what James Baldwin wrote to you, right? That if they come for you in the morning, they will take us in the night. And I feel like, this is the moment to talk about how that kind of that kind of carceral logic is deeply rooted. The capital got globalized, so did the prison, right? And so we are thinking about the ongoing genocide and mass displacement of Palestinians, and also the criminalization of dissent at this moment. And so I have a question from a PhD student in the Urban Education Department, Lucien Baskin, and they are asking you, and they want to ask you, What does the policing of Palestine solidarity on college campuses teach us about the entanglements of our universities in imperialism and the carceral state, as well as the possibilities for abolitionist organizing and internationalist solidarity? Lucian, thank you.
So I think I should ask the person who formulated that question to come up on the stage, because exactly. And you know, I should say, well, you know, first of all, you know, those of us who've been involved in Palestine solidarity are experiencing a moment that's so contradictory, because, you know, on the one hand, it's just so painful and so much grief because of, you know, all of the people who are being made into the targets of the Israeli state and the IDF, and what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the West Bank. But then on the other hand, this kind of engagement with Palestine solidarity is what many of us have been struggling for decades. So it's, you know, I wanna smile and then I wanna cry at the same time, because it should not require these tragedies to stimulate people to do the work. But at the same time, I am so happy that students all over this country have been pushed to challenge the US state. And don't let me talk about you know, what's happening in the US government right now. But we're also learning so much. We're learning about how ideology functions. We're learning about, you know, the way something like anti-Semitism can be totally weaponized and turned into its very opposite. But yeah, and I spent a few minutes with the students outside who are on hunger strike. And I think we should all and I told them that we would try to generate the energy that they need to continue, because they're not getting it from food, they have to get it from our enthusiasm. No, but what and I know we're over time, I'm sorry. No, okay. But I wanted to say, he said he shook his head, so that means I can say what I wanted to say, which is that the prison abolition movement, the abolition movement was very much inspired by struggles in Palestine. And we've learned, you know, so much over the years. I know I first went to Palestine in 2011, wasn't it? Chandra, on a delegation with Chandra Mohanty, who's in the audience. With her daughter Uma, who is an amazing young activist. And I think we learned about carcerality in a way that we wouldn't have without examining and learning from the Palestine example. I mean, for example, early on, we were trying to talk about alternatives to incarceration. So, you know, what we were most concerned about was the fact that there were like 2 million people behind bars, more than 2 million people. So how do you decarcerate? I mean, that's a term that comes from the early abolitionist movement in the 70s. You know, how do you develop processes of decarceration? Now, there were some who were arguing that, you know, well, you know, they have those ankle bracelets and house arrests. and stuff like that. And so Palestinians taught us that the carcerality can be shifted to the community and can do as much or even more damage. And of course, Foucault, those of you know who Foucault's work, that was something that he wrote about as well, the carceral archipelago, and how it's not just about the bars and the chains and that overtly repressive. It's about control. It's about how control can be exercised without all of that. What we generally visualize as the tools of imprisonment. And then another thing, when we went to Palestine, we could see, we sort of knew this, but we experienced the fact that the vast majority of people have a relative or somebody close or they themselves have gone to prison. So I remember in meetings we would say, how many of you all have been in prison? And everybody would raise their hand. So we got a completely different perspective, which I appreciate, because now I think as a consequence of all of the work that has been done by so many amazing people in this country, people who have spent time behind bars are not as reluctant to admit that they've been in prison. It used to be that young people who had parents behind bars, they would be ashamed of it, wouldn't want to talk about it. And now sometimes it's, people are proud of the fact that they've done that time, but also that they've survived it, and they've used it in a productive way. They've learned how to read. They've written articles. They know more oftentimes about what's happening out here in the so-called free world than people who inhabit that free world know. And that's also as a consequence of the connection between students and people. I try not to say prisoners because we have to be careful about our language, to people who have been incarcerated, people who have been in prisons. And so when we talk about fields like critical prison studies, the originators of these academic fields are people who were or continue to be in prison. So it gives us, again, a different sense of the nature of knowledge, and the whole field of epistemology is designed to make some people more, what would you call it? More people, some people are more likely to be associated with the production of knowledge. And those people are usually the ones who hold degrees. Whereas so much work has been done by people. And I could go on, I'm sorry. I can't start preaching.
It is my esteemed privilege, honor, and with great enthusiasm that I present the 2025 José Esteban Muñoz Award to Angela Y. Davis for her significant... let's clap it up. We can go. Thank you for your significant contributions to activism and advocacy for the LGBTQIA+ community.